Hello, let's do a video on a value study drawing using the 4 basic shapes, shall we? Please just bear with me. This is kind of a new thing for me, recording my voice over a video that I've done. And I'm trying to work out the kinks as far as camera position, lighting, and all the other stuff. And just excuse my voiceover. I realize I am using the word too long. So here's a game. Let me know how many times I say or and let me know in the comments. Also, let me know in the comments how this works for you. Do you not want to hear my voice? You'd rather read at the bottom of the screen, or the words me speaking actually helped you? So let's get to it. This is just a simple value study. In other words, shading, getting the shadows, highlights, diffuse shadows, diffused highlights with the 4 basic shapes. For this, we are going to use a drop lead pencil with a 2B graphite. It's a semi-soft graphite. The drop lead pencil is just kind of like a mechanical pencil. The graphite is thicker than the ones you might use in school. It works well for what I'm doing. A kneaded eraser and just some cheap white drawing paper like we have at school. Some vocabulary words that we're going to be using, some terms: value, diffused highlight, diffused shadow, cast shadow, cross hatching, and a bridge. And as we go through the video, you'll see what these things mean if you don't know already. And the photo provided, as it says on the screen, it does not show all the values that I see in person. Your human eyes can see more than most cameras unless you're very careful in your exposure and your photography. But anyways, also the light got softer after I took this photo. The sky, the sun in the sky moved across, and the light coming in the windows, which this is primarily lit with, became very soft. And if you look at the cast shadows especially, after a bit, those edges of those shadows were very soft and faded into the value of the background more. We're going to begin by blocking in the overall composition, the space that those shapes take up on the paper. The shapes as in a group. Think of the shapes as one big object. So you want to work from large to small. So all we're going is going around the outside, the group of shapes. Kind of like drawing a box to fit them in. Very light lines. You can probably barely see them on the video if you can at all. Then we'll start boxing in our shapes. Just find our angles like we learned in class using the pencil. Lightly drawing our lines so we can easily erase them when we make errors. Here what I'm doing is what I call ghosting in the sphere. It's just very light marks for the outline of the sphere. Very, very light marks. I'm going to continue to do it using light marks and light lines until I commit. I mark the top, the bottom, and the sides of the sphere to get the correct size and the scale. If it's not obvious, the video I sped it up 200% just so you wouldn't get bored watching me draw, which you may anyways, but that's alright, that's fair. Here I'm blocking in the front of the cylinder, the round part of the cylinder that's facing us, if you remember in the photo. I'm blocking in the lines, the angle as it recedes into the background. Working on the cube, drawing straight lines. Using my whole arm to move as much as I can. Here I'm starting to commit a little more on those lines, making them a little darker. Be careful. You don't want the lines to be darker than any of the values around them. So if it's a white background, white shape, you don't want a dark outline. It'll look like an outline drawing, a coloring book type of a drawing. Now I'm going to start to slowly add the values. I'm going to slowly build up layers gradually from light to darker tones. Notice my very loose hand movement. Very light touch. Also notice the angle of my pencil, how I have it angled very low. And I'm also holding it, I'm choking back on it almost, kind of like a baseball bat. Choking back on it, very loose grip, and a low angle is going to let me use more of the graphite, the edge of the graphite. Instead of a pinpoint, I'm using more of the side of it. It's going to help with a nice smooth tone without the lines and having to blend as much. I'm starting off with just some simple cross-hatching, just crisscrossing lines to create a tone. I'm just suggesting a tone here. I'm not really detailed shading. Don't worry, some gentle buildup. It'll smooth out. It'll blend itself as you go over it. This is why you build up in layers slowly. Now we'll start building up the background. This does a couple of things. Now we'll start building up the background slowly. What this is going to do, it starts to add value or tone to the background, but it also helps define our shapes as the background surrounding it or behind it. Soon you'll see those crosshatch lines, those pencil strokes disappear as I start to smooth and add to more layers. Carefully, using the point of the pencil, lightly I'm adding that line at the bottom of the cone, just refining it a little bit and defining the shape a little bit more, just very carefully. As I'm shading around the cone and around the other shapes, I'm kind of pulling away from them. This will help me keep that outside shape nice and crisp, or the inside, the line of the outside of the shape, if that makes sense, nice and crisp, rather than going inside the lines. And I'm beginning to cast shadow onto the surface. The light hitting the cone creates a shadow on the opposite side. So I'm starting to darken that in there a little bit, just positioning it there. More cross-hatching and adding some shadow on the shadow side of the cone. Notice here my pencil strokes are following the form of the sphere, the roundness of the sphere. I'm trying to emphasize the roundness, the sphere-like shape of it, the characteristics to make it a ball rather than a circle. It's almost like you're drawing on top of the ball itself. You're following the contour of the ball itself. Did you notice the mistake? I corrected it off camera. Luckily, or unlucky for you, you didn't see how I did correct this. Uh, but the angle and size of the cylinder was incorrect. I measured that incorrectly. And I had to fix it. A little bit of erasing of the shadow underneath, and I corrected the angles of the lines, the top and bottom of the cylinder. Uh, and I made the front part of it, the round part, a little bit bigger. Here I'm adding the cast shadow onto the flat surface caused by the cylinder underneath there. It'll get much darker, especially up underneath where it's receiving virtually no light. You'll see. By tipping your pencil up at a higher angle, it lets you use the end of it, the more of the point, to get a more precise edge. If you're right up against the edge of a lighter tone, tip your pencil up, use the tip of it, but be very careful. You don't want line here. You just want to add tone in a small area, very precisely. Don't push down too hard. Also, notice that the sphere casts a shadow on the side of the cylinder, so you have to compensate for that. It's not just a shadow, it also reflects a little bit on towards the top and back of the cylinder as well. Just a little bit of reflection, but mostly some shadow in there. That's going to bring these two shapes together. I tend to like to work all over the drawing from side to side, top to bottom, just kind of building it up. It helps with consistency. It helps fight boredom too. It can get a little monotonous, shading in one area, trying to build up. But mostly it's just going to build consistency in your values across the whole composition. If you work too hard in one area, one small area, and you just keep going and going and going, on the other side, on the right hand side, it might not be the same. It might not be consistent. So work all over. It helps build up the whole drawing a little better that way. Again, I need to emphasize this. Go slowly and build those values up layer by layer. Don't push down on your pencil to try to get it too dark too quickly. Here you'll notice I'm darkening the edge, the back edge of that cube. It's okay if I'm pushing a little hard here because I'm not going to make that line any darker than the value that's behind it. The wall behind it is going to be that tone or darker, that value or darker. So I'm not worried about having an outline on the back there because the background will be dark enough to kind of camouflage that line. You notice I switched to a different camera for a better view. The other camera just kept shutting off automatically. This one is more positioned above the drawing, and it's in 4K, so if I can actually go in nice and close on some of the details if I wish. And it makes it a little more comfortable drawing. I'm not in a weird position. Here I'm starting to really build up the background values. It's a medium dark gray with darker shadows, so I'm slowly building that up. You also notice the contrast on my hand. The light is a little more contrasty now. The room is actually a little darker, and it's a different camera, so it's going to look different a little bit. So if you're concerned with that, that's all it is. And here's some details, some close-up, just a little detail in that area, show you how I'm handling that and how I'm shading that area. Small shadow area behind the sphere in the cone. Zooming, that's some Michael Bay special effects right there. Are you proud of me? And here we'll start building up the surface of the table, the flat surface that the stuff sits on. It's important. It'll establish the ground, give the shapes a place to live and sit. Just building up that cast shadow a little bit there. Start adding the value. You can probably hear those cars go by. I live in the city. All right, here's something I just was too lazy to go to the other side of the room, my drawing room, and grab another piece of paper to use as a bridge. I always preach this. Just a simple piece of scrap paper or clean paper, actually. It'll help. Just lay it underneath your hand when you're drawing. It'll help keep the smudges away, keep your hand from getting all graphite, keep your drawing much, much neater. As you're resting your hand, even if you're not moving it, the oils of your hand are going to mix in there, and it can smudge and make a little weird spots there, some blurry spots. Just make sure when you move it, you don't slide it. You pick it up and move it and then put it back down. Here you'll see where I'm starting to shade in underneath that cylinder. There's virtually no light in there, so it's going to be pretty dark. I'm probably not going to match the darkness I see. Depends on how far I want to take this. And here, again, apologies for the lower quality of the video than what you would see in real life, but this surface and the side of the cube, it might look white, but it actually isn't. It's got a slight grayish tone, a very, very light tone. It's not a white, but it is very, very light. First glance, in person, you might say it's white, but if you look at it and compare it to a white specular highlight, you'll notice. Another mistake. Yes, I made a mistake. The back edge of the table was too low on the left-hand side by the cone. And I have to fix that and kind of raise that line up to be even. If you notice over behind the cylinder there, the edge of the back edge of the table, I have to bring that up a little bit and match it. Just dabbing it with a kneaded eraser, you can lift a lot of graphite off. Those kneaded erasers work really well for that. If you rub it too much, you can smudge things, move things, and damage the paper. Then the graphite doesn't lay on it as well. Just be gentle. No rush. And I could take it much, much further, and I'll get into that a little bit in the critique section, which will be shortly. This photo is close to a photographic representation of the actual drawing in person as I could get. If I took my time and photographed it with a gray card and did all the rigmarole with getting a good photograph, you would see better, but it is what it is. All right, as promised, I'm going to give myself a little critique here of this drawing I did, this simple value study. In other words, it's just a study of the values, the shadows, the highlights, the midtones, and kind of like we did in class. First things first is my composition. You can see the error right away. The edge of my composition is right here on the edge. The edge of this shape is right here on the edge of the paper, which usually isn't a good idea unless it's carrying all the way off the page. That's usually fine, depends, but it's just an awkward ending of this cube right here. That's a miscalculation in proportions from the edge of this cone over to the edge of the cube. I needed either more paper or to make these smaller to fit on that page, and it's kind of like an error when you saw at the beginning of the video when I kind of blocked things in, then things changed once I started drawing the cone. The size of the cone related to the size of the sphere and cylinder and so on. More careful measurement would have fixed that. Next is the values, the tones. I could go further with this. I could spend 30-40 hours on this, just refining. The more little work you do in there, you can bring out more of the tones, the values very carefully. The background could have been darker. As you saw in the photo, it was a darker gray background. Probably reality it was closer to this value, but this is a shadow area cast by this sphere. You can see my cast shadow here on the background could have went darker, just to my eyes. Same with the cast shadow here. In here's fine, it's dark, no lights getting there. I could get even darker down in there. I probably could have taken it further in the front of this. I just kind of stopped and called it a day on that one. Now the critique now is, at night, so the light on this is going to look a little different than the rest of the video. Apologies for that. Now let's talk about some of the vocabulary that I talked. I mentioned diffused shadow, and diffused just means softened. In the shadow areas, if it's a harsh shadow, you'd have a harsh line. It'd be an edge from the shadow to a midtone. And here it's diffused, meaning it's a gradual tone from the shadow to medium tones. There's also diffused highlight, and you'll see that here in the sphere especially. It's not a specular highlight. Specular would be like a sharp reflection, and I'll point that out in the photo right now. Okay, but this is a diffused highlight. It's very soft from the whitest white to the next tone, which is a gray tone, which is not white. You'll also see over here on this shape and this shape, I put a little tone. It's hard to pick up in the photo of the drawing, but a little tone because it wasn't, in my eyes, absolute white. In person, I can see a little specular highlight here, which is whiter than what the white of this surface and this surface is. But anyways, that's diffuse highlight, diffuse shadow. This is our value study. Go ahead and try this again, but you don't have to have the basic shapes. You can use the photo as reference if you wish, and let's see your take on it. But you can also just put simple objects out and do a value study. Practice shading. Look for those darks, those lights, those diffuse shadows, diffused highlights, and see what you can come up with. And use some of the techniques I showed you for shading and see what you can do. It takes practice. So keep drawing. Goodbye.